This is Aaron from Strong Anchor Tech. Today I'll be showing you via a code walkthrough how you can create a simple offline first to-do application using Reframe and PouchDB. We'll be creating something like this where you can create a to-do note and it will be added and saved into PouchDB and also synced seamlessly between browser sessions. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to use the Reframe template to make a new application. While that's getting started, I'll also note a little library that you might want to pull up in your browser, which is the com.stronganchortech/pouchdbfx library. It contains some middleware that allows us to hook up Reframe right to PouchDB. You might also want to go to pouchdb.com/API to see all of their API documentations. So here we are with our new product, our new Reframe project that's been created. I'm going to make a couple changes here real quick before I start things up. The first thing I'm going to do is I like to include a CSS library called tachyons. So I'm going to pull that file in. And I'm going to go ahead and paste the link to that CSS into this file here. I'm also going to need to install PouchDB and another plugin I like, which is PouchDB Find, into my project. So I'm just going to use npm to install those. And that's also a link to from the PouchDB FX documentation. And finally, I need to add a dependency to my project.clj to pull in that middleware library. So I'm going to throw that in, and then I can run line deps and line watch to start up the project. Alrighty, and with a little time warp in there, since lines takes a little time to start up when I'm running OBS in high def mode, we can flip over to our app and refresh here, and we see we've got the default sort of Reframe application. So we're going to go ahead and start writing some code. We're going to need to do a couple things here. For one, we'll need to hook up the middleware library somewhere so that the events get registered. And we can just copy and paste that right out of the README. I like putting it in the events place because I think that makes sense since it is going to register an event and an effects handler. That's what we'll do. We'll switch over to views and let's make a card that's going to, or reagent control that's going to make new documents and put them into PouchDB. So we're going to call this one create to do. There's going to be a couple fields that we'll need, and we're also going to need reagent.core inside this file because we're creating basic reagent components. So let's say there's a title, which is going to be reagent. Let's add them. There's also going to be a text in each card, in each to-do, that is to say. And then here we need a div. We'll have another div to hold the label that says title, and then an input field so that they can type in the title. So we're going to do title text. The value, we're just going to reference whatever's in that title atom. And then on change is going to be a reset title to whatever is in the text field at that point in time. So we pull that out. And I can go ahead and add in this create to do here so that we can take advantage of the hot reloading. We can see it going as we want. I'm going to use tachyons a little bit here to do just some brief styling. Mostly this is going to be a fairly ugly sort of application. Not going to spend tons of time styling, but tachyons does give us a way to real quick clean certain things up. So we're going to copy this down and now make the text fields. We need to change the label, change the things that are being referenced so that we're editing the text field. And then of course we need a button that's going to say actually create this new to-do item. And of course we could add things on here like the people involved with the to-do and the due date. Since this is a real simple app to demonstrate mostly the syncing and how you build one of these apps, we're not going to complicate it with too many fields. So then when the user clicks this create to do button, it needs to do something. And what we can do is take advantage of what's in the library file that we included, which is PouchDB fx.cljs. It does a couple things. The first of which is this really large function here, which creates an effects handler called PouchDB that basically takes in a map of options, and all the potential keys are listed here, and then based on what you tell it the method is, it switches on that. So for things like post, it's just going to end up looking up the database, the PouchDB object, and it's going to call the function, and then there's some other things in there as far as success and failure handlers that we'll talk about. So that's the effects handler. There's also an event that this registers, and the event is also called PouchDB, and all that does is it triggers the effects handler. So the upside of that is for us here in when we're clicking the button, we don't need to go over and make a new event. We can just dispatch the existing event for PouchDB. And what that's going to look like is we have this map of options, and some keys are always, always required. Some keys not always required. So we can go here and find the method that says post. We can also look at the API here when we see create update doc, and this is the PouchDB documentation. My library is basically just a wrapper around that. So we scroll down and we take a look at post, and it says create a new document and let Pouch auto-generate an ID for it. It sounds exactly like what we need. So we need a name for our database, and this name is how we refer to our database throughout the program. So there's no handles or anything fancy like that. It's just a string to refer to it. And of course, if you don't like things being stringly typed like this, you could define a variable that's equal to a string and then put that variable throughout, which would probably be the better way to do it. For our method, I'm going to say it's a post, and then the one other thing we need here is the document. And the document in CouchDB and PouchDB, a document is basically just a JavaScript map of things. And that map will always have an ID and a revision, and then whatever other data you want to put in it. With post, it assigns the ID and the revision for us, so we can just pass in a map of whatever data we want. And the PouchDB FX library I wrote will handle all the conversion from ClojureScript to JavaScript and back again for us. So title is just going to be what's ever in the title atom. Text is just what's going to be in the text atom. So, we can go in and type things there. They'll be in the atom. When we hit the button, it'll be in there. We can also specify these success and failure handlers. So if I want to make a success handler here, I can say print line success, and then whatever PouchDB decided to return to us. So we can go ahead and create a new card with just a title of foo. We're going to go ahead and create that. And we see PouchDB is telling us that, yes, you were successful. We got something back. It assigned the ID and the revision. So somewhere deep in the bowels of our browser, in its IndexedDB, we now have a PouchDB database called to-dos, and it has a single document in it with this ID and revision. Now, the database isn't too much use if we don't know how to get things out of there. So let's go ahead and do that the reframe way. We could, of course, call a get and grab things out, but that's not very reframey. Really what we want is some way to basically make what's in PouchDB the source that the reframe app DB is pulling from. So to do that, we'll need to flip over to events here, and we'll need to make something that loads the documents from PouchDB into reframe's app DB. So for that, I'm going to do reg event effects. I'm going to call this load from pouch. And then all this is going to do is trigger a function on the to-dos database, and that function is going to be our all docs function. If we look here, this is a fairly standard pattern inside of PouchDB, is to call all docs, and it gives you back a list of all the documents in your database. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of pack that into our database, our AppDB's node. So we'll say method all docs. There's some options we could put those in. We don't have to, so I can just leave that blank from now. I do want to make a success handler. And anytime there's a success handler, I could put in a Lambda function. I can also put in a keyword that will dispatch another reframe event. So I can go ahead and create a reframe event here called load from pouch success. Oops. Reg event DB. And then, of course, this will print load from pouch success. They'll just print whatever gets passed to it. So if I call this event, load from pouch, it's going to call the all docs method on PouchDB. When it's successful, it's going to trigger this event, and this event is going to do something. We'll want this event to take all the documents and stick it into the AppDB for reframe, but we probably want to take a look at what sort of data is coming back first, which is why I put that print line in there. And to make things easier for us here, let's just go ahead and make a button that loads from pouch so that we can trigger this event. So we're just going to say on click, we need to do reframe dispatch of load from pouch. And we should be good to go. We do that and it says, yes, success. It loads all our things and we have, it looks like one row. And we have a document. Let's add another document and see if that updates to 2. So we create a to-do. We run loads from pouch. Let me fix that typo. And we see that, yes, total rows is up to 2. But the problem here is, what about those attributes we tried to put in, like title? I don't see those anywhere. And the reason is that all docs is returning us row data. It's not returning document data. If we want the documents themselves, we need to use this options.include_docs option. So I'm going to say include docs true. And now when we run this, we see that, at least we should see it. We ran all docs. Oh, let's see, I must have a typo in there somewhere. Ah, yes. It's options, not option. There we go. So now we see that doc is, the full doc's getting pulled back. We can see the titles now. And before we go ahead and just stick all of this into our AppDB, we probably want to pull out just those rows. So first I'll do a little destructuring here, where actually the event is the event and then the list of arguments. And actually we can do one better than that, right? Because this list of rows it's a map. It's got some metadata like total number of rows, offset. We don't care about those. So let's just say that docs is going to be, we want rows, args, and we'll put that there. We can hit for load from Pouch again. We see we're a little closer, but again, there's this row data. So each element in this array is a row, and it includes the doc, which is underneath this little doc key. So actually what we need to do is we just need to map the doc over this list throughout the rest of the row data. All we need is those documents. So we do that and we see, great, we've got a list that's just those two documents that we stuck in the database. So at this point, we can get rid of that print line, and we just need to return the database, only we're going to associate the docs node with all those documents we got back. So this event will indeed update the reframe AppDB. So of course, we need a little subscription to work with so that our view code can use this. So we're going to make a subscription. We're going to call it docs. And this is going to be super complicated. It's just going to pull docs out of DB. And obviously, you probably wouldn't call this docs. You'd probably have it be to-dos or something that actually reflects what you're storing in there. I'm just leaving it real cheap and cheerful here. And we can go ahead in our views code, create a to-do list. So let's see, we'll need to make a subscription to docs called reframe / so we subscribe to that subscription that we just made. And we're going to create a div, and inside that div we need to map some function that displays the doc. So for that we'll just have a div, and it's going to have the doc as a thing in it. And we'll need to map this over at docs, and don't forget to dereference it. And then we'll put in our little map here down at the bottom. And of course we hit load from Pouch and we see, cool, loaded them in. Now this also gave us a little React warning error here saying we need a unique key prop. Because right, we're mapping over something, we've got a list. For efficiency reasons, it wants us to have a key for those. And the nice thing about using PouchDB or CouchDB docs throughout your UI is that all your objects, in fact, do have a unique ID. We can just set the key to be whatever is the ID of the document. Now when we reload, we can see that error goes away. So if we create another thing, we can create the to-do, we can load from Pouch. That's neat. But this isn't very reframey, now is it? Because we create a document and our list doesn't update. So kind of thinking old world, we might be like, oh, that's because when we put a new doc in the database, we need to tell the app to reload. So if I create a new to-do, then, hey, it adds to the list. But even that's still, it's kind of the old school way of doing things, right? Of I change my underlying data, and I have to remember also to do a reload or whatever. And Reframe's really all about using cascading events driven from your data to build your app. So in fact, we want to get rid of that line altogether. And instead what we're going to do is take advantage of PouchDB's change watcher. So if we flip over into events.cljs, what we can do is say I'm going to def once, just once at the start of the program, I'm going to set up a watcher. And the watcher there, I could dispatch an event and do attach change watcher. Or I could just call the function directly, which I kind of like to do. So I'm going to do a PouchDB fx / attach change watcher. which takes in the DB name, which is to-dos. It's going to take in options, and then it's going to take in a change handler, and that change handler is just going to be load from Pouch. So every time it sees a change, it's just going to reload everything. Maybe not the most, efficient or long-term solution, but when you're working with, say, fewer than 50 documents in your UI, it's all you need. And as your app scales, of course, you can be more careful. You can look at what the change is and then only change the relevant little subset of documents. So if the user changed their name, you don't need to reload all the to-dos. You just need to, reload the user's name or whatever. But for a little demo, we'll just reload everything. And there's one other option that we want here. We can look at the changes feed, and there's this options.live will emit change events for all future changes until canceled. So if we just call attach change watcher, that looks for changes once. And that's really not good enough. What we want is something that is going to not only look for changes, but keep monitoring for changes as we go on. So we'll go ahead and add in that change watcher. We're going to reload our page and make sure that's defined and set up. And remember, in the views here, I took out that success handler from the create to do button click. So when we click that button, all it's doing is posting a new document to PouchDB. But because of that change watcher, when I do that, it goes ahead and knows, it detects the change, it updates the appDB, and then Reframe knows to update this. Which is pretty neat that I really can build my UI to be entirely responsive from the data, and I don't have to think about trying to maintain and keep everything in order. So let's see how easy it is to extend new functionality on here. Let's say I turn these into little cards so they look a little nicer. And let's also say that I want to make a delete button so I can get rid of these to-dos once I've completed them. So I'm just going to make a little X button, and I'm going to say on click, we're going to call reframe/dispatch. We're going to request that PouchDB does something. And then I need to flip over to my documentation here to see what is it. Oh, it looks like this remove, which takes in the DB and then a document. Let's see, and that's called remove. And then my doc is just going to be the doc. And the nice thing is this doc will always, always, always have the most recent revision and ID, because anytime anything in the database changes, we redraw the UI. Reframe does that for us. In previous apps, I've worked just trying to keep the UI in sync with a remote CouchDB, not using Reframe, just using Reagent. And you could have a case where the document changes on below the underlying remote database and the UI hasn't changed yet. But since PouchDB is local, we don't have to worry about that. We can just go ahead and say, yeah, make this little thing, and then when we hit this X, it deletes the document, automatically refreshes this. So that's neat, right? We can make an offline first app, where PouchDB has basically just become the appDB that Reframe is using. And it seems snappy enough, and we don't have to worry about, keeping things in sync. But what about when I want to, say, pop open another browser and start syncing my data between the two? Over here I've got Chromium open, and it's got a different PouchDB stored because it stores documents in the browser's indexed DB, and Chromium's got a different place to store that than Firefox does. So wouldn't it be great if I had some way where I could just keep these two sessions in sync when they're online? And I can indeed do that. I do need a remote place to keep it in sync, so I've got Couch running on localhost. So let's go ahead and create a little component where the user could type in some credentials for that remote thing and start syncing to it. So I'll say we're going to make something called sync UI, and then this is going to be very similar to above here, so I'll just copy and paste. Oops, forgot my little arguments there. Already acceptance of taking a title and text and creating something. Instead, we're going to say this needs to sync. And instead of a title and text, we have a username and a password that they need to type in so that I can sync with that remote couch. Doesn't sync with just anyone. Needs a username and password. So I can update those. Need to update these atoms that I'm using. Same for the password. And then also for the password, since it is a password field, I'll make it a password field. And then for this button, instead of calling post, let's see, it looks like I'm missing something here. Title. Ah, yes. Instead of post, I need to call sync. And there's a function for this. It takes in the database name, a target. So my method is sync. I've got my database name. We've got some options. So let's take a look at what our options are there real quick. We've got sync, and we've got that live thing where we keep the sync going. Otherwise, when you call sync, it just does kind of a one-shot thing. It takes all your documents, puts it on the other, takes all the documents on the other, puts it on yours, and then it's done. Instead, we want something that syncs continuously. So whenever we have a change, it tries to send it down. Whenever it sees a change on the remote side, it's going to try to send it up. Let's see. We don't need any handlers for this because we have that change watcher. So as long as the database is sync, the UI is going to reload and refresh for us automatically. So the final thing I need here is the target, which is going to be, in this case, a URL. And naughty, I am using HTTP, not HTTPS, because I am running locally, combined with a super insecure and username and password authentication. 5984/do. So that's the URL of my database there. And actually, that should be all I need to get the syncing working. So I've got this in both. I'm going to go ahead and type in my username and ultra secure password here and hit sync. I'm going to do the same thing on this side and hit sync. And you can see, well, when I synced here, it took everything in PouchDB and sent it down to that CouchDB. And here I synced to that same remote CouchDB, so it pulled those documents back up. And what's neat here is if I'm in Firefox and I create a new to-do, it creates it here and it syncs it over quite quickly. Same thing if I'm in this tab. I can create one from Chromium, and then we'll see it appear over here. I can also delete things, and it always keeps those databases in sync. So what's nice about this is for really not much work at all. I just needed to call a single method here. I'm able to have an offline first app that's fully responsive, fully goes with the reframe model, and it also keeps it itself in sync and even gives you kind of some real-time collaboration aspects if you wanted. There is one element which I'll be leaving out of this walkthrough, and I'll be doing in a future video, which is about conflicts. As we have this app written right now, we actually won't run into any conflicts because what can we do? We can create a document which uses a UUID, so there's never going to be collisions. And we can also delete a document. So if these two sessions got separated, then the network connection went down, and I deleted Baz on both of them, there wouldn't be a conflict at all. The document would be the same. CouchDB would just deterministically pick one of them and both of them say the document's deleted, so we'd be fine there. The only realm I could potentially get into trouble is if I were, say, editing the text here and editing the text here on the same note. Then what would happen when I resynced, if I didn't do any further work, is that deterministically one of those would get picked. So the UI wouldn't break. However, we'd have some, an edit. It wouldn't be lost. It wouldn't be shown to the user either, though. It'd be sitting inside an old revision part of the document inside CouchDB. So that's probably a topic for a future video. So if you've got any questions on this code walkthrough sort of thing, definitely reach out to me on GitHub. Leave an issue with the library, or contact me directly. Hopefully this has been helpful for your front-end offline first UI design.